You are now listening to a reflection from the Yeshua community. We walk slowly, we listen carefully, and we seek understanding. Let us begin.
When we speak about God, one of the most common objections we hear is this: there is no proof. But before we can even discuss God, we must ask a more basic question. What do we actually mean by proof? In everyday language, proof often means absolute certainty. Something that cannot be questioned, something that forces agreement. But in real life, that is rarely how we come to believe anything important. In mathematics, proof can be absolute. A theorem is proven beyond doubt. But most of life does not work like mathematics. Think about a courtroom. In a criminal case, there is almost never one single perfect piece of evidence. Instead, there is a chain of indications. Witnesses speak, forensic traces are examined, motives are considered, timelines are reconstructed. No one claims absolute certainty, but at some point the court says the evidence is strong enough to reach a verdict. Not perfect certainty, but reasonable confidence. Science works in a similar way. A scientific theory is not proven in an absolute sense. It is tested, it is examined, it is strengthened or weakened by observations. A good theory is one that explains what we see, one that makes sense of the data, one that fits together in a coherent way. So when people ask for proof of God, we need to ask, what kind of proof are we expecting? If we demand mathematical proof, then we are asking for something that does not even apply to most of reality. A more honest question might be this: is belief in God a reasonable explanation of reality? Let us take the first step, the existence of a higher power, a source behind everything that exists. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does the universe have order and structure? Why do the laws of nature hold so consistently? These questions do not prove God in a mathematical sense, but they point in a direction. For many people, the idea of a creator is not an irrational leap. It is a reasonable hypothesis, a way of making sense of the existence and order of the universe. The second step is more demanding. If there is a creator, does this creator care about morality? When we look at nature, we see both beauty and brutality. We see cooperation and we see struggle. We see care and we see suffering. Nature itself does not appear to be a clear moral system, and yet human beings have moral awareness. We react to injustice, we feel guilt, we admire kindness, we recognize courage and compassion. This suggests something unique about human life. At this point, we should make an important distinction. When we speak about God and morality, we should not imagine that God has morality in exactly the same way human beings have morality. Human beings live under moral law. We can do right or wrong. We can fail. We can grow. God is not a moral agent in that same limited sense. Instead, God can be understood as the source of moral reality itself. Just as God is the source of existence, God can also be understood as the source of what is good. In that case, moral truth is not something human beings invented. It is something we discover and respond to. We do not create justice, we recognize it. We are called to live according to it. And this brings us to the idea of a moral compass. If human beings are created by a good source, it is reasonable that we are created with an inner awareness of good and evil, not because we invented it, but because we participate in a deeper moral reality. This is not a mathematical proof, but it is an indication, a sign that moral awareness is not accidental, but connected to the source of our existence. So a second hypothesis arises. Perhaps the creator of the universe has given human beings a moral awareness. Not that all of nature is moral in the same way, but that human life is meant to be lived with moral responsibility. Then comes the third step. If God exists, and if God is the source of the good, and if human beings are created with a moral compass, then it follows that our actions matter. We are not only biological beings, we are moral agents. Our choices have consequences, in society, in our own conscience, and perhaps also in relation to the one who gave us life. Up to this point, the path is coherent. A creator is a reasonable explanation of existence. Moral awareness points toward a moral source, and this implies responsibility. But now we must consider another important question. If God has given moral guidance to humanity, what about the Torah? The Torah contains many commandments. Some are about justice, honesty, and care for the vulnerable. Others are about ritual, diet, purity, and social structure. Traditionally, the Torah has been understood as given by God. But we can still ask, Is it reasonable to believe that every single detail was directly dictated by God? Or is it more reasonable to see the Torah as a meeting point between divine guidance and human history? When we read the Torah, we find profound moral insights, care for the stranger, protection for the poor, limits on power, a call to justice and mercy. These are deeply meaningful and life-giving principles. At the same time, we also find laws that clearly belong to a specific time and culture. Laws about agriculture, laws about temple service, laws about ritual purity and ancient social structures. These do not function in the same way in our world today. This leads us to an important observation. Even within Judaism itself, the Torah has never stood alone as a simple, self-evident text. It has always been interpreted. It has always been studied, discussed, and explained by teachers and sages. Rabbis examine the text. They compare passages. They ask how commandments apply in new situations. They reason, argue, and seek understanding. This tells us something important. If every commandment were perfectly clear and universally applicable in a simple, literal way, there would be no need for such a long tradition of interpretation. But in reality, interpretation is necessary. So if God has given moral guidance through a text, human understanding of that guidance will always involve interpretation, judgment, and discussion. This prepares us to understand Yeshua. When we look at Yeshua, we do not see him rejecting the Torah, we see him interpreting it. He brings attention to its deeper intention: justice, mercy, faithfulness, and love of neighbor. Then we come to the most difficult and sensitive question: the crucifixion. Yeshua was arrested, condemned, and executed by Roman authority with the involvement of the temple leadership. For his followers, this was a shock, a collapse of hope, a deep crisis. In such a moment, they naturally asked, what does this mean? Why did this happen? One answer was given by the Apostle Paul. Paul interpreted the death of Yeshua as an atoning sacrifice for sin. Within his framework, this forms a coherent theology. But we must still ask, is this the most reasonable way to understand God? If God is the source of the good, does it make sense that God requires the suffering of an innocent person in order to forgive? Or is it more reasonable to say God forgives because God is good? And Yeshua shows us how to live in that goodness. In this light, the crucifixion becomes a revelation of faithful love, not a payment demanded by God. So we are left with more than one interpretation. Each person must reflect and decide, and we return to where we began. Faith in God is not about mathematical proof. It is about reasonable trust. It is about asking, what best explains reality? What best aligns with our deepest moral insight? What leads to a good and truthful life? And if belief in God leads us toward justice, mercy, and humility, then it is not only a possible belief, it is a meaningful and life-giving one.
This has been a reflection from the Yeshua community. We have walked a little further together. Thank you for listening. Until next time, Shalom.